Cheryl, Brian, Kevin, and Liza and Adrian, first of all, thank you so much for taking some time today to hear what this tool is all about and what the background is, and then thank you for being willing to sit down with Mark and Larry in a few weeks when they come in for the beta test. As some of you know, but not everybody knows, PCW is, since 2008, has been really working on helping to skill up individuals to get the skills that they need to fill the open positions that employers have. Over the last few years, we've been adding to our focus, working with employers to help them build their competitive advantage by investing in their talent supply chain and improving their internal policies and practices to help them recruit, retain, and advance more of their workers. And this is part of a nationwide initiative that has been actually started a bit by the Hitachi Foundation, but now has really amplified more with the Aspen Institute and others around good companies and good jobs. And so I'm sure Mark will go into a lot more detail about that, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of background on that and to thank you again for giving us some of your very valuable time to consider evaluating this tool and thinking about how we might be able to make it even better. So are there any other kind of introductory kind of overall questions before we get into the initiative and the tool? All right. I will hand it off to you then, Mark.
So this is Mark Popovich with the Aspen Institute. I started here on December 1 after spending a little bit more than a decade as a program officer and then a vice president for programs at the Hitachi Foundation, where a lot of the genesis for the work that leads to this tool that we're talking about today comes from. Basically, we were always interested in approaches that ended up with companies doing well and doing good, in terms of doing well, in terms of outperforming their peers, in terms of financial and business returns and objectives achieved, but also doing good in terms of creating opportunities for job stability, earnings growth, and career advancement for particularly frontline workers. So we basically spent a lot of time meeting with companies, understanding in particular sectors, mostly in healthcare and manufacturing, but now extending to retail, hospitality, and related services, what it was that was possible within those sectors, what was sort of average performance, what was outstanding performance. And I think one of the things that we saw was that the innovation that led to real change and benefit to the companies and employers and their workforce really started kind of outside of the human capital innovation or human resources innovation. It really started in product or service innovation and then process innovation. And when things happened in either of those two spheres, people innovation tended to follow and to enable what was being driven by a driving business opportunity or a need to change in order for the company to thrive and survive. So we've done about 100 business cases, and we've carried that over to the work that we're doing now in developing this tool. So I'm going to move to the second slide, and before I turn it over to Larry Schlang, I'd just like to point out to everybody that there's on the left-hand side bottom of your screen, there's chat and questions. Why don't we use the chat version of this so that you can put any questions up along the way, or you can do it that way so that we can see them on the screen, or you can just call them out if you need clarification on something. It's best to bring it up as we're going through the slides so that we can answer your questions. So I'll turn it over to Larry to introduce himself.
Hi, everybody. Like Janice and Mark, I want to thank everybody for attending the call today, and very much look forward to meeting you in a couple weeks. Mark has basically been involved in the Good Companies, Good Jobs initiative for a number of years. When he first told me about his thoughts about creating an application that would be able to capture data and use metrics to identify, good companies that provide good jobs, as well as the elements that go into what good jobs are. I was very excited about it, and Mark and I were talking because of my background in starting and building technology companies. So I've created a few different companies. One I've been working on now for a number of years is Bantu, which we started as a software development company, and we do that as well as we do a lot of work for commercial and government entities doing information technology services for them. And we created, together with Mark and the Aspen Institute, we created a company for this project called Working Metrics, or the site is called Working Metrics, or the company is currently called Good Jobs Corporation. And I started the company, and I'm the CEO, and working with Mark to build the functionality and the application, and then we're doing it in a way which is iterative, where, working with folks like you who are testing it, to get your feedback and to work that feedback and ideas and suggestions and additions back into the application to make it of increasingly greater value for folks like you. So I look forward to meeting with you and happy to answer any questions that you have as we go on.
Thanks, Larry. So reason that we're interested in this is there's a swirl of interest both within companies and beyond companies into sources of capital, investment and lending, supply chains, public sector, nonprofit sector, in companies that are doing well, doing good, providing good jobs. But as we viewed the landscape, part of the problem out there is there's a developing range of different definitions and different ways of operationalizing those definitions of a good job. But overall, I'd say we were concerned that current approaches were more subjective, didn't rely on, on their base have reliable data, were often entailed a lot of time and a lot of effort by companies and to report, and for others to receive those reports and understand what those reports and data might mean. So in the end, it was kind of an expensive and slow process. And we wanted to see if we could solve that problem, because we think getting that solved creates and opens up some new opportunities for insights and for connections. So our next step was to begin to investigate creating an online system, basically with the cloud and analytics and data reporting and the rest. We thought we could begin to create an online system that would facilitate and form this kind of intermediary role between companies who have the data and are providing the good jobs, and others who would be interested in the analysis of that data. So I'm now on the slide about what's required. We needed to become an intermediary, carry out an intermediary function that would allow the reporting of data, the gathering of data that was reliable, to automate it and design it from the beginning with the idea of minimizing reporting burden for the companies. So we wanted to use really verifiable, high-quality data. Brian raised a question on the side here about the difficulty of verifying good jobs companies in B Corp and their associated certification process. B Corp is a group that when I was at the Hitachi Foundation, we supported with some grant funds over time, but also worked with them pretty closely. Of course, the B Corp GEARS system, GIIRS system, entails more than employment metrics. It involves sustainability, community engagement metrics as well. it does have a pretty significant reporting burden, and some of the data is subjective and hard to verify. I think right now we're in an early stage of different systems developing to assess good job companies. Gears and B Lab is certainly one of those, or B Corp is one of those. And I think we're in a phase where a lot of innovation is happening, and we'll see which ones meet the market need and can address the sort of limitations out there. When we started developing this system, we thought, first of all, that we know that social impact investors who are values-based and other more traditional investors and lenders who are more value-based could benefit from having this kind of assessment of a company, because there's a lot of research, there's a lot of experience out there that pretty much shows that that companies, firms that do the right thing with their employees get higher return on investment, get better results in terms of business metrics. So one of the key processes, one of the key stakeholders that we want to engage with this kind of information is companies who report and the investors or lenders who provide capital to them. But it's also of interest to us what the companies do with the information. It's a way to get operational insights and also to measure HR practices and human capital investments over time. Supply chain customers, right now, it's price, reliability, and an ability to adapt to quantities that are needed in fairly short order. I understand why those are the three primary conditions in requirements in supply chains, but it's also likely that those correlate pretty strongly with being a good employer and having a good qualified workforce that's really strongly engaged in the mission of the company and meeting the needs of the customers. Economic and community development organizations are another potential engagement partner or stakeholder. There's something called community benefit agreements, which will provide tax abatements or support and loans to companies that agree to meet certain kinds of metrics in terms of employment. This could be a system that would facilitate the collection and reporting of the information that would be needed to verify compliance with those community benefits agreements. And then, of course, academic foundations and economic development players are also a potential stakeholder here. We're looking at it in terms of being used in evaluation systems that would reduce the burden on employers or other systems to provide the data that's needed for evaluation. So let's talk about the value proposition from a reporting company's perspective. We're fairly early in the beta testing of this product, this software system, but already with the companies that we've engaged, for many of them, they've been able to get into some insights that they haven't seen before at this level of detail into the outcomes of their operations. They've liked the fact that it's automated the analytics and allowed them to benchmark against companies and peers. That gives them further insight about, well, am I above average, below average, about average? And we'll get into the scoring and the benchmarking of it in a little more detail in a bit here. It's a system that should provide the right kind of exposure to investors and lenders. And, right now, this is sort of the ground level beta testing for a system that's designed to serve the needs of the job quality investment and lending field, and having some experience with that in its early stages may be an advantage to firms as they look toward sources of capital in the future. And then, of course, we value and the kind of input that you can share around the direction of working metrics about the development of this tool. Larry, did you want to add in here in terms of operational value to reporting firms?
Well, I think you covered the points, Mark. I guess what I was thinking as you were talking is, Mark is going to get into the actual application, and we talk about it as a beta. If some of you know what sort of lean development is, lean startups is you pick a sort of a small application to build. You don't build the whole thing all at once based upon all your unproven hypotheses. You build something that is defined and that you can actually test against to determine whether some of your foundational thoughts or hypotheses are correct. So that's what we've done, and what you're going to see as we go on is it's a small subset of what the application can become, and that will be based upon the input and the feedback and the sort of testing response that we get from folks like you. So the value to potential reporting companies can be if you see sort of the vision of what something like this can become, that you can channel parts of your vision into what would really help your businesses out back into the evolution of the application. And that's something that we highly value and definitely want to make part of our whole operating sort of mandate as we go forward.
Okay. So going on to the beta demonstration. So the way this works right now is companies just can't walk in off the street and find the website and report. You actually get an invitation. So we have select companies who are invited to participate in the beta. You get an invitation that gives you a temporary password. You sign in, change the password so that it's secure for you. You will show you in a minute how you share job-related data into the site in order to allow us to do the analytics on it. The source of data that we're using, we started with a definition around good jobs, particularly sensitive to minimizing the reporting burden on companies. So what I knew from doing work for a number of years is the unemployment insurance quarterly filing data is something a company has to do for all UI covered employees. They have to do it on a regular basis. The information has to be very reliable because there are civil and other penalties if it's reported incorrectly, and that it's usually pretty easily accessible by key company officials, and it's fairly simple in terms of in the quarterly data report, the quarterly administrative reports. They're essentially just two columns of information. There's a Social Security number for each employee that's under UI covered employment, which we're not going to ask you to report. We don't want you to report Social Security numbers, and we don't want to have them, but I'll explain how we address that in your system. And then for each employee, it's their earnings during that quarter. So it's simply that information, and it allows us to make calculations about your company's performance on three scoring factors. Those factors are retention rate, overall net job growth, and employee earnings growth. That's not an absolutely perfect definition of job quality, but it's a pretty good one. Retention and its opposite, which is turnover rate, shows whether people are staying or leaving, voting with their feet, or staying because of the opportunities are of value and valued by the employees. Earnings growth shows that there's participation in the progress of the firm and the financial growth of the firm, and overall job growth is can be a real indication that it's extending opportunities to others in the community. So again, all the data is secure. It meets all the industry meets or exceeds all industry standards, and it encodes Social Security numbers on your desktop in the app before anything is sent to us. You can see that the Social Security numbers, which is the only personally identifying information in the system, you can see that that's encoded before you allow the information to be sent up to us. So I'm just going to pause to see if there's any questions about this. The next set of slides would be around the app itself, using screenshots to show you what it looks like and how it works.
Mark, this is Brian Gardner. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm wondering, and if you're getting into this later, don't let me take us off on a rabbit trail. But one of the thoughts I had was that some employee turnover might be good turnover. Somebody might be leaving sort of an entry-level position voluntarily in pursuit of a better position in another organization. So with that as a background to the question, do you anticipate, like, would these encoded SSNs allow you ultimately to track the same individual employee across companies?
So right now there wouldn't be enough density of reporting to allow that. But in fact, it is a durable identifier number, and if the density of reporting by companies gets high enough, it would allow us to track that individual into a new employer. So the way we think about it now is that you're being looked at as a company in terms of turnover rate within your sector. So some level of turnover would be expected. Turnover would probably be expected to be higher in retail or restaurant business than in a manufacturing business. And so you're being assessed in that way. So Stephen had a question. Is job growth defined as new jobs created or added? It's net job growth. So we'll show you the cohort groups as we define them down the way. But if you had 22 jobs in the base period, and then 3 years later in the most recent period, you had 25 jobs, the job growth would be 3. Now, if you've had in the 22, you've had some people leave and you've added new employees, so that wouldn't be counted as net job growth. So it's net job growth. Does that make sense?
It does. And just following up on your last comment, when you talked about being able to track employees if they leave one job and go on to a better job and how that impacts turnover or retention, something that we've been talking about here in Cincinnati is negotiated agreements. And negotiated agreements are where a smaller firm will partner with a larger firm to provide career advancement opportunities and kind of fill the pipeline for the larger firm and being able to manage attrition and predict turnover. So just thinking ahead, could we use the retention category once we expand this to more employers to kind of measure and track some of that negotiated agreement strategies?
Yes, I think we just have to modify a bit of the analytics, but as long, it's easier, of course, when you have partnership agreements between an employer, sort of a destination employer and a feeder employer, because if you're basically requiring all of them to report and they're all reporting on a quarterly basis, then it does provide the capacity with a durable, unique identifier number to track that employee over time, and we would just have to change the definition. We'd just basically pool the data across those firms and then allocate it back out. So yeah, I think we would be able to do that. Does that answer the question? And then we had a question from Kevin Sharp, temporary agency to help with the hiring process. So if it's temp to perm and the employee the initial worker is an employee of the temporary firm, then that individual would not be in your unemployment insurance quarterly filing. They would be covered by the unemployment insurance quarterly filing of the temporary firm. Once they were hired, they would be under UI quarterly report. So there's sort of two phases of when they would not be counted and when they would be counted. In the initial phase, when they're somebody else's employee and they're kind of on a tryout, as long as they're not in your UI database, and I don't think that they would be if they're actually employees of the temporary firm, then that wouldn't affect your turnover rate. Okay, I'm going to go on now to the. Those are great questions.
Hey, Mark, this is
yep.
Larry. Just real quick. As you'll see when Mark goes through it and when we get together, we actually have a small sort of sub feature in the application where we're asking, what percentage of your overall workforce are people from like temporary agencies or something like that, to try and begin to get some information about that. And then, over time, again, based upon testing and user feedback, there may be some type of functionality that we can add into that to actually start tracking transitions and, data and analytics related to people transitioning from temp to perm, as Mark described a second ago.
Right. So now we're going to show you some versions of how it gets set up. What you would actually see on your screen in the functionality of the current version of the software. So I'm going to begin with the investor interface. I think we may have some investors on the line today, but also because we think an initial commercialization, which is beyond the beta testing, an initial commercialization, it's driven a little bit more by investors. For example, this system might be free to reporting companies, but at some point investors might be paying the cost of us delivering this intermediary function of collecting the data, analyzing it, and generating the benchmarking and scorecard reports. So the way we see it working is in commercialization is investors or lenders would be the ones that are issuing the invitation for a company to participate in the system and share that data. In other words, they're getting ready to go to a loan committee meeting for the month, and they would have the usual information that they've gotten from companies, but they also want to have some good jobs, human capital outcomes information to consider as well to supplement their decision making. So I'm going to run through the investors interface first. So essentially, they're given an email address and password to log in. That's a temporary password in an invitation from us to be an investor. They go in, they change the password so that they can be secure. They go in and see a screen where they begin to build the database that they want to consider of companies. So they begin to add companies to their portfolio of firms that they wish to have reporting. So this is the screen that they would see under Investor Adds Company. So the next thing they would begin to do is list some basic information about the company, its name, the type of business it is, corporation, LLC, etc., the location, the city, state. Right now we're using a company identifier as the employee, the tax number, the EIN. In the future, that might be a unique number related to the management information system of the investor company so that they can basically incorporate the information directly from our system into their MIS in order to support decision making at the firm. So the first thing that they do in addition to all of that is name the person and the email address who's going to be the primary contact, which is usually the CEO for the company. And the CEO for the company will get an email inviting them to participate. But we'll go through the next step, which is this investor company is beginning to build out their portfolio with Acme and Dynagility and Servco and TMA Solutions. And they're looking at, right now they don't have reports from these companies, but some of the companies are authorized and some of them are pending. So they're going to be tracking that over time and inviting them and reminding them to report. So once they've done that, we're going to slip over to the firm or employer interface. And what happens is there's generated an email invitation from the investor or lender to the company, inviting them to participate and giving them assurances about confidentiality and how the information is going to be used. And essentially, it's the indicating who the invitation is from, gives them the initial link and a temporary password to sign into the system. So the company then, right now in the beta test, we're generating the invitation and sending the link and the temporary password. So you would get it from us, and then you would sign into the system, and you would get some information on this next screen. Company registration is pre-filled in by the investor or lender company, and others you're going to be asked to add. So for example, in the middle of the screen, after the company identifier number is sector. So sector is very important so that you're benchmarked against like firms. Right now, we're only down to the single-digit industry codes or SIC codes, sector industry codes. So it's the 9 major industries. Right next to it, this language has slightly changed to indicate percentage of employees who are not directly employees, that are temporary employees or contract employees. This is just a pull-down screen that allows you to indicate what percentage there are. Right now, we've not hooked that up to be a benchmarked criteria, but we're collecting data on it so that we can begin to benchmark it by sector. So you would also be able to include other addresses for the company, because there are, in some cases, parent enterprises and sub-company establishments that you might want to list. And then I won't go into all the details, but they're basically different users and roles. So the first user listed was the user invited by the investment company. Larry is the CEO. He can look at anything, and he can upload anything. He's going to allow a second manager, who in this case is his CFO, HR director, to have the rights to upload the information, and he's going to ask that person to upload the data that we need. So going on, so the way we've set this up for now is we're using latest available quarterly report, which might be Q3 or Q4 of 2016, and then the same paired quarter from 3 years ago. Paired quarters because there is seasonality across many businesses, and in order to control for seasonality, using the same quarter, it pretty much falls out. And then 3 years, scientifically arrived at on the basis that it's less than 5 years and more than 2 years. It seemed like it felt like the right amount of time to do some comparisons. So you need a baseline period and a current period in order to do change over time, and we're basically doing it at that level. So what most people are doing, I'm going to go to the template next, is uploading Social Security numbers, which could be with or without the dashes, and the quarterly earnings. So you've either got a report that you've generated, the company has generated through your own payroll system, and you've exported that into a quarterly report to the state of Ohio, in your case. Maybe some of you are in Kentucky. To the state unemployment insurance administrative agency, and you're copying, pasting, and dropping it into this system. So at this point, everything that you're doing in this last slide and uploading information in this template that you're looking at, this is happening on your desktop. This is not being reported into our system. We're not capturing any of the Social Security numbers. What we're going to do is you're going to have an opportunity to see the data as it's processed into durable unique identifier that's not a Social Security number before you send it to us. So that's what's happening next on this screen. Is the data is available in the files. You've uploaded the files into your desktop system. And then you can see down in the bottom right-hand corner, there's a review. None of this is submit yet. It's review. So the first thing you look at is Q1 of 2016, which is your most recent period. You can see the employer identifier number is no longer a Social Security number. These are encoded numbers, which we cannot break back into Social Security numbers. And, I don't think anybody else can either, unless they have sort of an infinite amount of computer processing time and the kind of code-breaking ability of the National Security Agency. So it's not likely. But this is allow you to be assured that you're not sending us anything like Social Security numbers, but it's also a quality check. So you can see in Q1 of 2016, is this the right number of employees? Is this the right number of total quarterly wages, which you probably had at the bottom of the sheet of data that you filed with the state. So you can just check that, make sure it's right. If it's not right, you can go back and reload the information. The next screen is you're checking the base period. Same kind of information there to see that it's encoded and it's the right number of employees and the right number of amount of quarterly wages. So as soon as you upload that information and hit upload, you see in the bottom right-hand corner, it instantly generates your scorecard. And I'm going to go to the scorecard now. And it comes to you right on your desktop. It's something that you can, if you look on the upper right-hand corner, you can download into a PDF format. This is yours once you've uploaded the information to do with as you will. Essentially, the information on this scorecard is for this transportation and public utility company got a B overall on their score, which is above average, below the top, but above average. It says that they could improve their score by attending to average earnings change over time, but they already did get a bonus for the exceeding the industry average for company-wide retention rate. So the 3-year change for employees under $40,000 a year, these are the criteria that we use for benchmarking the firm within its industry. So retention rate, which is the second one down, that is 40% of the total weight of the score. You can see that this company, Cogswell Cogs, got a 75% retention rate. Just to the column to the left, the industry average was 40 to 60%, so they're certainly above average there. They got a B. 30% of the weight is for net job growth. You can see that they got a 25% increase in net jobs. The average for the industry is 0 to 5%. They got an A for that. Their average earnings change was 8% over the 3 years for the 40,000 and under group. The peer benchmark for the industry is 9 to 15%, which is kind of a little bit above a 3 to 5% annual increase. So they got a D on that. The company-wide retention rate is low for this sector at 50%. They got a 92%. So they essentially got, this is a 5.0 scale. A is a 5.0 on the way down, all the way down. A minus, B plus, etc. And the extra credit, if you will, like writing the additional paper that was optional, they got that, and it's a 0.250. So next band down, you can see that we show a number of bands of employees under 20,000, 20 to 40,000. It's the combination of those two groups, that is the under 40,000 that we do for the scoring. But you also get the data and for all three of those metrics for the 40 to 60,000 a year employee and the over 60,000 employee. So in this case, it's NA for under 20,000, which is actually the case you can see down here that they had 0 employees in Q4 of 2013 under 20,000 and 0 in 2016. And you can see the distribution by count of the number of employees in these different earning in these earning cohorts. So at this stage, you can go on to the next screen after you've seen the scorecard. And just to give final assurance to the company of control over its data, Invesco in this case is asked to see the social impact score, and the company can choose to either deny that or to approve it. If they approve it, it goes right off to Invesco. and they see it as an incoming email. So they can include that in their consideration of the company. So I'm going to pause there. So we've been working on this to improve the utility of the system, make it more intuitive, and to look at different things that might add value to the system. But so Stephen asked a question, and then I'll open it for other questions. Are firms benchmarked or compared against the entire industry or by size within in the industry? Right now, it's within the industry and not broken out by size of firm. We anticipate if we can get enough reporting within an industry to go down both in terms of more than single-digit SIC codes. So in retail, you could go down a restaurant. You could go in restaurant either to fine dining or into fast food dining, because they're going to have different performance on these metrics, and also to go to differences by firm size. But while we develop these benchmarks from either directly being on the plant floors of companies and looking at their performance over time, or interviews with key informants who are industry specialists, sector organizations, and the rest, that didn't allow us to differentiate yet by firm size or lower than single-digit SIC or the 9 categories. But our intention is to go there. We'll just need to begin to actually get data reported in order to make it possible to do that.
And Mark, I have one more question. When it comes to the translation of the Social Security number to the identifier in your system, does the same identifier relate back to the same Social Security number? And if not, how can you then compare retention and not job growth, but increase in earnings?
So there's a data code key that allows it to go into, that takes it from a Social Security number from a very, very long mixed numbers and letters, durable identifier number. But we can't break it back into a Social Security number. So the same procedure, whether that Social Security number would be reported by Company A or Company B or Company C, in the reporting process, it will always produce the same unique identifier, but we don't have the data code to break it back into a Social Security number, and nobody else would. Yes. Right. But it's translated only one direction, right? It's translated from the Social Security number into this unique identifier number that's not a Social Security number. So Ray had a question about how are the industry average develop. Again, right now we're starting with based on experience in the field and interviews with key sector industry associations and others and researchers. But you know, our goal, of course, is to make it dynamic, is to, on the basis of the data that's reported and the analytics that we can run on it, you know, like once we get 40, 50 manufacturing firms, we can begin to do, we can begin to evolve both the benchmarks, but we can also evolve into more breakouts by subsectors within manufacturing and size of firm within manufacturing. So our intention is to both reflect more data reporting, and as time goes by, to update that to reflect differences in labor markets. So you can imagine turnover rate and job growth rates in the Great Recession were very different than they are now with a very different labor market. So as we evolve over time, depending on what happens with the labor market next, we want to be able to adjust those benchmarks as well. So they should be dynamic in all those different ways. So we really are partly doing this because there's been a lot of research around good jobs outcomes, human capital, investment, and firm performance. But this will be a uniquely powerful tool in order to prove under what conditions that really holds. That proves that the risk is lower and the returns are higher and more durable for good jobs companies. And that's part of the key here for making this valuable to investors or lenders. I think everybody suspects this data will be useful in that way and that it will correlate with financial performance and lower risk. But every investor or lender will kind of have to prove that to themselves with their portfolio of companies and the data that they get, because up until now they don't have experience with this kind of information because the information has either been unattainable or could only be collected at great cost to the reporting companies. So that's where we're headed with this, and that's why we're asking you to help us by participating in this beta test. One other sort of example, this is not currently a function that we built into the system, but basically where we're going here is about this correlation is in the horizontal scale, it's the good companies, good jobs score from low to high, left to right, and then risk-adjusted rate of return from low to high on the vertical scale. And we loaded in company data, and you can see here this upwardly sloping line indicates that there's a positive correlation. And we could imagine that an investor or lender in trying to put this together would be with their investment decisions, they'd be looking at sort of this upper quadrant over here where there's high score for human capital performance and high expected risk-adjusted rate of return. So this could turn into a tool that would help them assemble their portfolios of investments and track it over time.
Mark, if I could interject at this point, this is Janice. One of the long-term hopes that I have for this tool is that we really start to influence the total community and the social impact investor community and employers in our region to really drive our culture to becoming a good companies, good jobs culture across many different industry sectors, and have the investor community help to make that happen so that it's mutually beneficial for the companies, but then also for those who work at those companies. So I'm hoping that this really starts to impact our culture and in a positive way.
Yeah, so I mean, what we saw in doing the work on the high-performance firms, the pioneer employers, the good job companies, is many of them had taken a flyer to kind of question whether the given norms within an industry were enough. Like, maybe we need to accept a 33% turnover rate in our entry-level workers. But some employers have decided, well, we're going to have expectations of higher performance of those employees. We're going to train them, and when we train them and engage them in a redesigned workflow, they become more valuable to us, and therefore we can't afford to lose them. But I think a big issue here is it turns out that industry kind of accepted norms may have been right in the past, but are no longer right to current conditions. So part of this is a rigorous way for companies to look at themselves and to look at peer companies and say, are we doing as well as they are on this dimension, and how does that dimension of employee performance and human capital performance correlate with our financial and business performance? But it is like a credit rating score that gives you further insight into sort of what's happening within the system. Yeah, Ray was raising a question about like a rating on Amazon. So we were looking at systems like Glassdoor. Glassdoor, I don't know if you guys have looked at your Glassdoor ratings, but but it's a little bit like Yelp reviews for restaurants. They tend to be either very, very high or very, very low, and we kind of wonder whether the high ones are from relatives of the restaurant owner and the low ones are basically from the competitors. This is far more rigorous in terms of data that's submitted. So Brian had asked a question about from what would prevent a company from gaming the system by submitting fabricated data. So if an investor is relying on this to make a material decision, they would likely include some auditing process, and we can build this into the system for the employer who's reported the data into the system. We can actually tell whether you've gone back and forth and changed your data a bunch. So that's test number one. Test number two, so you've tried to tweak the data to get the outcomes that you want. We can kind of see that. We don't see what data you change, but we can see that you've gone back and forth. The other part of this is that there would be the ability to ask for a copy of your 2 quarterly UI reports. And as long as you say that you have the ability to ask for those, the disincentive for tweaking the data gets pretty high because you're submitting basically fraudulent data in a investment application or a loan request, which is not a good thing to do. And then I guess one future way is it may be that if this gets broad adoption and it's kind of viewed as a system that's kind of like credit rating, that companies would be willing to, under certain conditions, allow the data to be reported directly from their automated payroll processing systems. And if that were the case, then it's sort of intermediary to intermediary reporting, and there wouldn't be a tweaking of that. But that's not at all the ask that we're doing right now. We're just asking for something, the UI quarterly reports that employers already have in their electronic file cabinet or in a physical filing cabinet that they can break down and submit. So Ray asked another question. Can you use the analytics to show the distribution of wages? So because of the data back here on the counts of employees right here on the scorecard, you could calculate it based on the from our analytics, you couldn't calculate the absolute earnings. You could calculate earnings bands. So what percentage of total earnings are in the band of over 60,000? How many employees are there? What's the average earnings? So you could do average earnings, but it doesn't look at any individual employees, breaks that out in a way that would allow us to do, like how much are the top 20% earning? Yeah, go ahead.
No, so you've got the raw data in the system, correct?
Right.
So you could make a factor that says, how much are the top 5% making as a percentage of the bottom 80%.
Oh yeah, that would be easy. Yes, you're right. We don't have the analytics in there to do that, but that would be an easy thing to add.
Yeah, if you want to use that as one of your standards, which is, wealth distribution, for example, you've got the raw data, you can create, that becomes a new standard.
Right. Just one issue there. Yeah, one issue there is how the top employees of a company are paid. Sometimes because they have an equity percentage, they may be receiving, or they have a balloon payment, they may be receiving next to nothing as current payments, but, they're actually, doing well. But it's not apparent from their UI covered wages earnings. So, I'd want to think about how that might distort looking across companies. But from the analytics perspective, absolutely, looking just at what is the reported UI earnings and making those analytics run, we could easily do that.
Mark, this is Janice. I'm a little sensitive to everybody's time, and I know we're running a little long here. So how much more do you have to go through?
That's really it. So this is just the timing. I'm on the last slide. The timing of when we're going to be out there. We anticipate with the companies that we sat down with so far, we do sort of a pre-interview. We watch while the individual reports the data to see if they run into any technical problems, if they run into questions. We're watching the user interaction with the system, and then we do a post-scorecard generation short interview with the same people in order to give us feedback about what they see and how that might be applicable. So essentially what we're asking for is about 60 minutes of time for our meeting with you, and these are the things that we do during that period of time. So we recognize that asking for any amount of time when you're working so hard in your business is an important ask, and we want to be sensitive to that, so we try to keep it within bounds of about an hour. But hopefully this will give you some insights about working on your business as well, so it'll be worth the time that you commit.
So the question I have to Cheryl and Brian and Kevin and Liza and Adrian, are you all still interested in participating? Is this all still seem good to you?
Yes.
Yep, we're in it, Richard.
This is Brian. I am interested in this, not as an employer, but as an investor. So I don't know if that changes sort of the timing for a follow-up discussion. But for example, I have no UI reports to submit, for example.
Yeah, no, we would like to talk to you. I mean, we're talking to investors now about sort of the next phase of development. So first of all, the implementation of this phase, like how would you use this data? How would you want to see this data? What does it need to interface with in your firm? Are you interested in this from a values perspective and tracking outcomes, or in making a decision about capital deployment? So there's a whole bunch of questions that we'd be really interested in sitting down and talking to you about. But you're right. I mean, we wouldn't be asking you to report data on your employees.
Great. Okay, thanks.
Okay, good.
Well, Janice, we really appreciated the time and the opportunity to work with you guys, and we'll follow up on the final scheduling. I'm gratified to hear everybody's interested.
Good. And you're going to send me the recording of this so I can send it on to the folks who were not able to participate, right?
My recording guy just held his thumb up. Yes.
All right. Good. All right. Well, thank you all. Very much appreciate your time, and be looking for some additional information.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Nice job. Thank you.
Yes, thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.